Every single patient that we see either asks us about how to optimize hormones or wants to ask us about how to optimize hormones, or probably should because they're so important.
And there's really just one thing you have to do to optimize your hormones. And we're going to tell you that thing right now. Hey there, I'm Mike.
And I'm Matt.
And I'm Jody. I'm just like you, except maybe not as smart or as attractive, but you know what I mean. I've got questions, but I have an advantage. These guys are two of my best friends who also happen to be doctors who are obsessed with longevity and human performance. So I'm going to ask them my questions. Things like, what's the best diet? How can I live longer and better? How can I get stronger and smarter? All the things you wonder and I wonder. And I'm going to record them. I'll do the work and you reap the benefits.
Okay, so here it is. The one thing to do
Is to optimize your entire life.
is to do this gigantic list of things that we're going to tell you. It actually is a pretty complicated topic, and we recently were teaching a medical conference at the castle, and we were doing a Q&A, and it seemed like a large number of the questions were about hormones.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we spent as much time talking about how to optimize specifically testosterone, but I think there was also some estrogen and progesterone questions as well. But, you know, the interesting thing about testosterone is that it's not just men that want to optimize it. I mean, we're seeing women as well who want to optimize it for libido, for energy, for athletic activity, lots of different reasons to optimize testosterone in both the sexes. So I think it would be great to spend a little time, Matt, and talk about our ideas on how to optimize T.
Yeah, it's such a complicated topic, though. It's difficult. And so I think we probably need to do a whole series. And we need to have our OBGYN who helps us to optimize hormones for women. We need to have him on the podcast as well. But I think today we could probably tackle testosterone specifically, at least to make it a little more manageable for us. And it's not just vanity. I think a lot of people think of hormone replacement therapy and having a better sex drive and just looking better. They think about bodybuilders in general, but it's really all kinds of medical risks. It makes a big difference for your health. If your hormones aren't optimized, then it's pretty much impossible to optimize you in general as a person. So it's an important topic to talk about. And it's not all hormone replacement either. I mean, that's possible, but really there's a lot of things that we can do naturally.
No, let's be clear.
Hormones.
I think people move to hormone replacement too quickly. I think that they don't give themselves enough opportunity to optimize their own natural endogenous production of testosterone before jumping to whether it's a gel or shots or beads or whatever it is. I think that really you want to try to optimize as much as you can your own production before you move to something like that, because as a lot of people say, it's kind of like a one-way door. You know, I mean, if you go too far down that path, it can be real hard to get back to making your own tea again in the future.
Well, and we're not against hormone replacement therapy. We think it has its place, but I don't want to talk about it at all on this podcast. I want to talk about just the natural things that you can do even without a physician just to optimize yourself and optimize your hormones. We probably should start, though, just talking about what is a normal level of testosterone. And the problem with that is that it totally depends. So if you're looking at a hormone chart or a hormone lab result test that you go back from your doctor, like how's my level? Well, it totally depends on who you are, if you're male, female, where you are, if you're a teenager in your 30s, 40s, 50s.
I think there's some general numbers we can use, though. I mean, just kind of throw it out there. First off, there's not only just total testosterone, but there's also free testosterone, which is important as well. The free testosterone is sort of the more active form, right? And the numbers are going to be different, like you said, Matt, for age, but also men and women. There's going to be different numbers. So, you know, good numbers to think about in a man is somewhere between like 6 and 15 nanograms per deciliter. And in a woman, that's going to be somewhere between like 0.5 to 0.8 nanograms per deciliter. And that's free testosterone. Total testosterone, you're looking at more like 500 to 1,000 sort of ish, with some more acceptable numbers under 500 as you age.
Yeah, and that stuff we just said with those extra numbers were probably a total waste of your time because you can just Google that. That's the easier thing to do. The more important thing is your numbers and kind of the general range, but with the symptoms. Do you have symptoms of low testosterone or hormone imbalance? And because if you don't, if it's not affecting your life, why do you really care where the number is? So it's important to put this in context of the person or the patient and how they're feeling. And those are things that are kind of intuitive. We know kind of like low libido or erectile dysfunction, but they can also be really non-specific things. Like people can have muscle loss, fatigue, weight gain, osteoporosis, trouble sleeping.
And insulin resistance. I mean, that's one that people forget about a lot, is some people out there running around with insulin resistance. It's not necessarily because of terrible diet or lack of activity. Sometimes it's because their testosterone's low.
Well, and it also, low testosterone leads to higher risk of all-cause mortality. And I think that's mainly cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline that we're talking about.
And also, but potentially prostate cancer. There's, all this research suggesting that basically like the more aggressive prostate cancers are in patients with lower testosterone levels.
Yeah, so we do, when someone does have low testosterone or issues with their hormones, we do want to test and treat them if we need to reduce those risks. But the problem with hormone replacement therapy, you kind of alluded to earlier, is it's not completely benign. It definitely carries some risks with it. Prostate cancer, you can also get risk if the testosterone is too high. That may be a little overplayed in general. I think that's the one people think about, and maybe the risks there aren't quite what people think they would be, but also there can be some coronary artery disease and some cardiovascular risk with having your testosterone too high as well. So,
well, yeah, but to be fair, there's actually research going both ways. So there's also research suggesting that there's a higher coronary vascular disease risk with low testosterone than there is with higher. So, I feel like whenever the studies are mixed like this, we really, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Some studies, a little bit of a positive effect, some studies, a little bit of a negative effect. It's probably closer to zero.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing about hormones in general. It's kind of a Goldilocks thing. We need to get them just right. And we've got a pretty big range there that we can get them just right. But we don't want to just start replacing hormones all the time, or we don't want to be super against replacing hormones either. There's a place for replacing them. But that's one of the reasons I think we like the natural methods of balancing hormones and increasing testosterone, is because it's pretty impossible for you to use these natural methods and to get into the danger zone. Your body has homeostatic mechanisms that really help to keep you in the correct zone if you're not taking exogenous hormones and you're just working on the things that you can do to optimize your lifestyle. So we really should just talk about those, I think.
Yeah, let's focus on lifestyle factors for elevation of specifically testosterone. And we're not talking about just men here. We're talking about men and women, because there are clear advantages to low levels of testosterone in women.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, the easiest thing, just to go ahead and sum it all up before we've even talked about it, is just to live a healthy life, just to optimize all the things that we talk about on the podcast in general, all the individual things that we talk about, sleep, nutrition, fitness. Those are the things that are going to optimize your hormones as well. The problem is we live in an environment now where it's very difficult to optimize your hormones. The world is set against you to make your hormones not optimized. So let's get specific.
I feel like we constantly keep coming back to these things of sleep, exercise, appropriate diet. If you do those things 80% of the way there.
Yeah, I mean, we have patients all the time. They want to get into the more complicated and the biohacking stuff, but it's really a waste of time to be biohacking if you're not optimizing your sleep, nutrition.
Sleeping 5 hours a night and standing in front of a Juve light for 2 hours, that's not exactly going to make you healthy.
No, you're wasting your time. So, but there are some specific things. I mean, let's talk about the things, I guess, that do cause testosterone to be low in general, and we can kind of fix those. I mean, and the number one thing, we talk about those tables in general, age. So I guess the easiest way to not have lower testosterone is just to quit aging, although I guess the alternative to aging is not that great. So maybe ignore that one. I guess number two, I would say, is obesity. Obesity is a really big problem. I mean, I think most people's goal is to have good body composition anyway, but this is just another reason to optimize your body composition. Testosterone is converted to estrogen and fat cells. So the more you have, the more estrogen you're going to have. And estrogen actually slows the production of testosterone as well. So it's kind of a vicious cycle if you're obese and have bad body composition.
And while you're at it, Matt, sleep, right? Obviously, one of the most important things. I think when we were at the castle and doing that Q&A, I'm pretty sure one of us used sleep as our number one thing for improving testosterone. You've clearly got to get an appropriate amount of sleep. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to produce really any of these hormones, not just testosterone. This is important for estrogen production. This is important for DHEA, for pregnenolone. I mean, every single hormone running through your body is going to get destroyed if you've got extra cortisol production, which is what's going to happen if you're not sleeping appropriately.
Yeah, sleep just affects everything. I mean, we say that over and over, but it's just true. I don't think we can stress that enough. If you're taking injections of testosterone, but you're not getting enough sleep, that's just stupid. I'm going to go ahead and say it and be very blunt about it. You got to optimize your sleep before you start doing things like that. Diet, I mean, not to be too basic, but I mean, every bite of food that you take is a hormonal event. I don't remember where I heard that. I didn't make it up, but I really like it. I stole it from somebody. Sorry if you're out there. But a calorie is not a calorie. People have said that, and it's just not true. The food you eat really affects your hormones. It has a profound effect on your overall well-being and health, not just the amount, but the actual foods. Putting aside the obesity thing I mentioned earlier, there's things called xenoestrogens. These are chemicals and toxins that can lead to low testosterone. It's things like BPA and phthalates. We now see BPA-free on a bunch of labels, and that's important. But you got to be careful. Like the BPS sometimes that they substitute it for can be just as bad. Eating organic food, if you can do that, you're going to go a long way as well. Obviously, food you grow or when you know the farmer, that's going to be the best. That's why I'm always trying to get as close as possible to having all my calories come from production of farmer friends I know or myself. I don't care how weird people call me when it comes to my perception about food. It's important. These phthalates that I talked about, those are in plastic bottles. So that's something else to kind of avoid as much as we can. You can choose glass over plastic.
Yeah, I mean, while you're talking about food, Matt, that's kind of like, that kind of gets to food preparation, right? I mean, you got to make sure that you're not cooking your food in plastic. So reheating food in the microwave in plastic, putting hot foods in plastic prior to ingestion them, all of those things are going to increase, the plastic ingestion, and whether that's phthalates or BPA or whatever the next new chemical that they put in plastics is, eventually it's gonna completely destroy your testosterone production, your hormonal production in general.
Yeah, in general, the whole class of those things we're talking about are called EDCs, or endocrine disrupting chemicals, and you just should try to avoid them as much as possible. So also insecticides, fungicides, soy-based foods, bovine growth hormone, Teflon, all of those things.
Household cleaners, like Simple Green. I mean, like it's really all over. I mean, not just that. While we're at it, I mean, like lotions, detergents, underarm deodorant, like all of these things have so many chemicals in them that can just completely whack your testosterone production.
And I think we're freaking people out now because they're basically telling you everything in your environment can be leading. But that's kind of my point earlier. Our environments are kind of set up, so we really do need to focus on this if we don't want to have to take exogenous testosterone or other hormones. We really do need to be very mindful and cognizant of the basic things that we could do.
I think the next one to talk about is stress. Stress is going to completely destroy testosterone production. Cortisol directly inhibits the production of testosterone, and the more stressed out you are, the more likely you are to have low T.
Yeah, and just to go back to diet, I didn't sugar. I didn't even mention that, but that is just killing testosterone. Elevated insulin suppresses testosterone production, so refined carbohydrates are a big problem.
Matt, you mentioned a lot of things that we eat that can decrease testosterone production, but I think you forgot to mention something that we can drink.
Well, and I think you're worried about it because in 30 minutes we have a cocktail hour here at Hotel Domestique.
Super nervous about it. I'm thinking about how low my tea is going to go.
Yeah, it's sad when someone hands you a drink and you're thinking about the study that showed moderate alcohol consumption decreases testosterone by 6.8% when you should just be having a good time.
Sometimes that's what we stop reading studies.
We can't turn it off. But I mean, honestly, alcohol is a difficult one too because it's kind of a vicious cycle. Alcohol affects sleep. We've already talked about sleep and how it affects testosterone. Alcohol also can really affect your insulin sensitivity, and insulin we know suppresses testosterone. Any sort of refined carbohydrates or sugar are going to have a big effect. So
I'm feeling like this podcast is just getting really negative for me, Matt.
So what can people do?
Let's talk about some positives because you're taking away everything good in my life.
All right. So
I got to sleep all the time. I can't have any alcohol. I can't eat good food.
Well, what can people do? Let's give them some tips. Obviously,
I can tell you what you can do. You can sleep and you can work out.
Yeah.
Number 1 and number 2.
Yeah. Sleeping and working out. So optimizing your sleep. What about working out? So we should clarify that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true because some working out is actually bad. And we're seeing a lot of our patients who've got, borderline low testosterone because they're working out too much.
Exactly. So long endurance exercise can definitely have can definitely just trash your hormones in general.
Actually, I'll just say working out too much in general, whether it's endurance
Yeah.
or lifting or HIIT or whatever. If you're going to CrossFit 7 days a week, you can have just as low T as somebody who's run marathons.
Yeah, no, we have professional athletes that we work with, and it's not an uncommon thing for them to really have messed up hormones. And it's tough because they're people who really need optimized hormones. So
what are you going to do though? I mean, like, how do you know what is the right amount of working out? What do you use, Matt?
So I look at my Oura ring and heart rate variability and my readiness score. I think those, I mean, obviously there's some subjective, just how do you feel today? There's exercise science and designing your workouts and your days off so that you don't overtrain. But if you want objective data, I've tried different things, but I just really like the HRV and my resting heart rate from my Oura ring. I think it gives me good data. I think
if you're not going to have someone else design your workouts for you, which is probably one of the better things to do, because I think people inevitably prescribe you less exercise than you would prescribe yourself, or at least that seems true for a lot of the type A people that we deal with. But, if not, then you need to be tracking somehow, whether it's your resting heart rate, whether it's your basal temperature, whether it's your heart rate variability, whatever you're using, you need to pick one of those or maybe all of those numbers and really, really subscribe to them and live by them.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So if you were going to pick a type of exercise, Matt, that was better for increasing testosterone production, what is the type of exercise you would pick?
Well, just to generalize as far as exercise goes, I would say go for full body movements and lifting heavy things. So I'm specifically thinking about squats, deadlifts, and presses.
I recently remember seeing an article about increased androgen receptors in the traps as well, which is why you might see people getting some benefit with like powerlifting movements. So, clean and press or, trap heavy movements as well. So I think that there's probably opportunity outside of those three main, strong lift sort of movements that you mentioned. But I think that is probably the best place to focus your time when you're considering, how am I going to have the biggest bang for my buck?
Yeah, and multiple studies have shown that lifting heavy things definitely improves testosterone production. Not so much with aerobic exercise, like we mentioned, but aerobic exercise is still, I think, important. It's going to be good for improving your sleep and other body composition issues. So it's important to do. But if you're really focusing on testosterone, lifting heavy things with compound exercises, multiple joints is going to be the best way to go.
Well, I mean, we've got to consider longevity as well. I mean, one of our things here is, trying to optimize health span and longevity, not just testosterone production. So if we're prescribing exercise just because somebody wants to increase their testosterone, that doesn't mean we're not going to give them any endurance activity whatsoever. We know that, running is good for you for, reducing glutamate in the brain and so many other things, Alzheimer's prevention. So you've got to have aerobic along with the anaerobic, but it does seem that heavy weights seem to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and so that's what you do for exercise. Talk about kind of what you don't do and what you do. What about food? We've talked about.
You had too many do's there. There's a lot of do-dos.
We talked about foods to avoid. What about timing of food, Mike? Do you do anything specifically as far as timing of food?
So I think there's a couple good options here. So one, you can look at intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is shown to have some really positive benefits. What you see is if you do a prolonged fast or a long fast, you'll get a big plummet in testosterone actually, but you get this increase in androgen sensitivity so that when you do that refeed, you have a really like a big spike in testosterone. And that's probably pretty natural when we think about it. It's not normal for people to be eating, 16 hours a day. So if you really, concentrate that feeding window down and have that big spike of testosterone, that's probably a more natural way to do it physiologically.
Yeah, there was one study that showed an increased response up to 180% for a fast between 12 and 56 hours. So you may not get an increase in testosterone, but like you said, the androgen sensitivity, so the response of your body to testosterone, which is what you really care about. Nobody really cares about what their testosterone number is. It's how they feel because of that number.
Another one that most people don't really think about is actually not eating right before bed, which I think can have a big impact on testosterone because we know that eating right before bed, eating at night, actually increases insulin resistance, which immediately affects testosterone and decreases testosterone. So, concentrated eating windows, preferably not at night, and some amount of time prior to actually going to sleep.
Yeah, all that stuff is hard though. Most people just want to take a pill. So can we talk about supplements? for a little bit?
I guess I don't really want to go too deep into these. Like, so let's be frank about supplements. There hasn't been one supplement that has truly proven to work. There's multiple supplements that have had some positive research, but a lot of that research was funded by the actual supplement companies and has not been consistent when they've been retested. So things that people think about, we can talk about that.
Yeah, and what we do for patients, and one of the reasons we don't want to go too deep in this is because when we talk about specific supplements, we're kind of practicing just stats and epidemiology, the type of medicine we don't want to practice. What we want to do with a particular patient is, okay, you want to try fenugreek, then how's it going to affect you? So we have certain algorithms that we use, and we look at their exact DNA and genomics and try to figure out the effect on that individual person. So some of these supplements have been shown to be helpful when increasing testosterone, but it's going to be a very individualized case-by-case decision in general. But yeah, just to name some, fenugreek, there's been a little bit, that's a seed spice that some people use to enhance flavor. It's traditionally been thought of as an aphrodisiac in some cultures. And there's some studies showing that maybe it helps, but again, this study was not randomized, this particular one that I read. And the bottom line is I think it can be helpful, but not a whole lot of great evidence for it in general.
Yeah, another one is D-aspartic acid, or DAA. So the dose of that one's like 3 grams a day. There have been a few studies on this one, and some positive, some negative results. The positive results have all been in either infertile men or men who've already got low testosterone, and they've seen, sort of a moderate improvement of testosterone, 20 to 30%. And I'll tell you that that is pretty consistent throughout most of these supplements, where you see like this moderate improvement of maybe 20 to 30%, and typically the improvement occurs only in people with pretty pronounced low testosterone or infertility. That's when the majority of the effect is. So if you've already got normal testosterone going into it, the chances that you're going to have a bump from these supplements seems pretty low.
Well, and one that people don't think about, but actually could be pretty important, is vitamin D. Vitamin D itself isn't thought of something that increases testosterone, but it can definitely have a negative effect on your testosterone if it's low. There was a study from 2011 where they took a couple hundred overweight guys who were vitamin D deficient, and when they gave them vitamin D, they saw a 30% increase in their total testosterone production. So vitamin D itself, if you have good levels or you're optimized, probably not going to have a big effect. But if you don't have good vitamin D levels, your testosterone is going to be low. Honestly, a lot of things are going to be off. There was another study that found men with vitamin D levels below 25 had an odds ratio of 2.5 for hypogonadism or low testosterone. So we really want to make sure that vitamin D is optimized, and there's plenty of good studies showing that it needs to be optimized. So we need to test and treat that.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were going to go vitamin D on me. I guess like if we're going to talk about all the supplements, then maybe there are some that are probably meaningful and worth trying. I think zinc is one of them. There have been a few studies that have shown that if you take men and you actually decrease their zinc amount in their blood, you can actually make them hypogonadal, which means that you can actually decrease their testosterone by just robbing them of zinc. So there's pretty good research out there to suggest that you've got to have at least optimum zinc levels in order to actually make testosterone. So it's reasonable that if you do have hypogonadism, if you got low testosterone, to get your zinc, either get your zinc tested, or if you're exercising, it probably just makes sense to be supplementing with zinc, because most people who are chronically exercising on a regular basis often have a little bit low zinc levels that they need to treat.
Mike, what about tribulus terrestris?
I don't even know what that is.
It's fun to say. That's the main reason I brought it up. There was a study that showed, I think, a 16% increase in testosterone levels with supplementation, but it was in men with low sperm counts. It's not really been repeated. So some people talk about it, but I don't. It's mainly just fun to say more than anything else. Creatine is a common one, since we were talking about common things. This is a known supplement with kind of massive literature supporting its use. There's some studies showing higher testosterone, better body composition, sports performance. Honestly, it's kind of a nootropic and helps with mental performance as well. So creatine is one that we definitely recommend to people quite a bit for other reasons, but it could have a good effect on your testosterone.
All right, can we stop talking about supplements and talk about some other environmental stuff?
Yeah, what do you mean, like shining a light on your balls, like with the
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was talking about.
I figured you were going to go there pretty quickly. Yeah, Ben Greenfield talks about this a lot. We were talking about the Q&A panel. He was with us at the castle when we were going over things to increase testosterone, and he really likes the Juve Light. I think there is some data supporting its use. Mike, you and I both have a Juve light and use it. So I think we both think, I mean, it's one of those things that the risks are just pretty low compared to the potential benefit.
Oh, the risk, well, truly we don't know the long-term risk per se, but theoretically they are close to zilch, right? And, I'll tell you personally, I had a 40% increase in my testosterone just for using the Juve light for 20 minutes a day for a month.
Well, hold on. So you're telling me you and the other you from an alternate universe that you did a randomized controlled trial on.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, you can't just say just the Juve light because obviously you're doing
those
other things.
Those are the things that happen. So all I really thought about doing was use the Juve light, but realistically I probably did other things as well.
But I mean, there are some studies. There was a hot off the presses brand new study from 1939 showing that shining UV light down there on your junk can potentially increase your testosterone by about 200%.
I didn't even know they had UV light in 1939.
You mean you didn't know if the sun existed in 1939?
Oh, is that what the study was? They were just like laying out in the sun?
No, I think it was actually
actual UV lights.
Yeah. They didn't measure blood levels in this study. They were measuring, I think, endosterone in urine, but they kind of assumed the increased excretion was from increased production. And there's some other studies that aren't almost 100 years old. There was a 2013 study. I really like this one. It was lasers on little rat testicles, and I can't even say it without laughing. But what they did is they took a 670 nanometer laser light, and they increased testosterone without any other kind of worrisome side effects that they could find, at least in these rats. I'm not sure about the questionnaire they gave to the rats to measure the untoward effects. And this, honestly, it makes sense. I mean, we're laughing about this study, but it makes sense. Mike, do you have any idea how this would actually be working? Anytime we see a study and it looks like it works, it gives us that much more faith if we actually have a mechanism of action. So what would be the mechanism of action of shining lasers or red light right on your testicles?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably just like how blue light specifically inhibits ATP production. I think we're actually seeing an increase in energy production in the Leydig cells. So the cells of the testicle that make testosterone, you're actually seeing more testosterone production because shining the red light actually provides energy to the mitochondria within those cells so that they've got more energy to function. And there may be some upregulation is also going on there. I don't think we truly know, to be honest, Matt, but we do know that for other causes or other effects of the Juve light and of red light therapy, not just Juve, but any red light therapy, you're actually seeing protons being given to the mitochondria for energy production.
Yeah, and if you're not impressed by the rat testicle study, there was a study of men with low sex drive who were given light box therapy each morning, and then they were compared with a control group, and they had increased sex interest and increased testosterone compared to the control group. They were pretty impressive results. Their interest in sex in the control group went from 2 to 2.7, but then in the light group it went from 2 to 6.3, so tripled interest, and their testosterone went from 2.1 to 3.6 nanograms per milliliter. And didn't really increase at all in the control group. So there's some results of not just increasing testosterone, but actually having a symptom effect, which is what we really care about. Is the patient feeling better, or they having improved performance in aspects of their life?
Yeah, let's be clear. We don't want to just treat numbers here. So just because you have a low T doesn't necessarily mean that you need to actively be trying to increase it. You're really trying to treat symptoms. So why don't we summarize here? I'm going to give you a top 4 based on what we've just talked about, Matt, and you tell me what you think about this. So number 1, I think you and I both can agree that sleep is probably the most important single thing that you can do to increase testosterone production. Adequate sleep, improving deep sleep, specifically deep sleep, more than 8 hours a night. 2, diet. You got to be eating healthy. You got to decrease sugar intake. You got to decrease insulin resistance. You got to have appropriate amounts of micronutrients and macronutrients actually to produce testosterone. 3, I think lifting heavy is going to give you a giant bang for your buck. So, including some, high weight, low rep sets in your regular exercise activity, and also making sure you're not overdoing it. So making sure you're not, doing too much endurance activity. You're doing, 6-7 days of running or biking a week. That's not going to help your T production. And then I think 4 is probably these other supplements, the light therapy, so vitamin D, zinc, light therapy, sort of these things are probably that's the last 20% where you're going to try to get that improvement in your testosterone production.
No, I would agree with that. And honestly, I would even delete 4. I mean, if people just focused on sleep, cleaning up their diet, taking away sugar, alcohol, or at least minimizing those things.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. I mean, if
Lifting
you've got a
heavy.
good diet, then your vitamin D is not going to be 5, right? I mean, you're going to have a normal-ish vitamin D, enough to make testosterone at least, and same with zinc.
Exactly. And I mean, we were talking earlier about, we mentioned Ben Greenfield. I mean, he, I think, has a half dozen podcasts and articles on increasing testosterone. So if you've already optimized these 3, then go check those articles and podcasts out. But really, if you focus on those 3 things, then you're 90% of the way there. What about testing? Do you think people should get tested if they don't have any symptoms?
I think that's tough. I mean, maybe if there's other medical issues that you're concerned about. So if there's cardiovascular disease risk, if there's insulin resistance, those things, I might actually treat somebody who doesn't have symptoms.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I asked that question because I don't want people listening to this to start thinking they need to get their hormone levels checked and optimized. If you're a young, healthy person, you're not having any issues with it, I probably wouldn't worry about it or even think about it. Just focus on those 3 things we talked about, and you should be good. If you've got other risk factors, I think it is important to at least have a discussion with your physician about your levels and your hormones and optimizing.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, if you're thinking about getting your T tested because you're fatigued, are you fatigued because your T is low, or are you fatigued because you're not sleeping enough? And then if your T is low, is it because you're not sleeping enough or because it's low? But what I'm trying to get at is that sometimes it's kind of like this chicken or the egg effect, right? Like a lot of the symptoms that come from a low testosterone come just from generalized fatigue because you're not recovering enough. You're too much endurance activity, not enough sleep. So is it really that the problem is the low T in the first place, or is it just the lack of sleep in the first place? And my answer is it's probably the lack of recovery.
Well, and I think the key thing you said there was think about it. You got to think about it. So when we're talking about hormones, when you go talk to your doctor, if you're worried about these issues, if your doctor just immediately prescribes you exogenous testosterone
Without
based on a
talking to you
test,
about any of this stuff, you need to fire that doctor.
go somewhere else. Yeah. So you should be thinking about it, and your doctor should be thinking about it in a complex way. And I think that's the kind of takeaway from this. Optimize your life in general, and then be very mindful of how you approach hormone replacement if you're going to go down that route.
And that's not to be said that some people don't need hormone replacement therapy. Some people do, but it should be after a protracted period of attempting to optimize all of these lifestyle factors before you jump to something like that.
So get some sleep, clean your diet up, go lift something heavy, and then come back. We're going to talk about women's hormones specifically, which is a really difficult topic, but an important topic that we've got to cover.
We hope you like listening to the podcast as much as we like making it. If you think it's valuable, share it with somebody. Send it to someone you think would really benefit, and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Those reviews really, really help us out. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at WildHealthMD. If you didn't like, well, why are you still listening? Email us and let us know what we can do better. But the best way you can thank us for our time is to leave a review and share. Until next time.